Change is the only constant, but navigating through transformational times is rarely straightforward, especially when it comes to ensuring customer success. Shifts in market dynamics, rebranding initiatives, and evolving go-to-market strategies can create a ripple effect across organizations, testing the resilience and adaptability of customer success teams. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. I am your host, Randy Likas, and in this episode, we'll explore how leaders can master the art of steering their teams and customers through periods of change. From maintaining team morale and ensuring alignment across functions to leveraging data and technology, we'll unpack the strategies and frameworks that empower customer success leaders to not just survive, but thrive during transformational times. And joining me today is Andrea Bumstead. Andrea is a recognized expert in customer success strategies for SaaS technology companies, known for turning satisfied customers into loyal advocates, spearheading collaborative customer initiatives, and building high-performance teams that deliver exceptional results. Andrea excels at bringing out the best in people while driving measurable business value. As a thought leader in customer success, Andrea is an active member of Women in Revenue and Pavilion, and is a sought-after speaker sharing her insights on driving business growth through customer-centric strategies and exceptional team leadership. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Randy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So, Andrea, I usually like to start these and just maybe have you walk us through a little bit about your background and your career journey.
Sure. So I can't believe it, but I'm actually coming up close to 20 years of experience, all in the post-sales side. So I started in marketing. I then was an account executive for a number of years, and then I transitioned to customer success. And in my last 3 roles, I've been responsible for major transformations of customer success organizations. First at Procore, when Procore was entering the Canadian market for the first time, I founded the customer success team and built that from 4 people to over 30 people across 5 functions. Then moving to Revenue.io as a vice president of customer success, I transformed their customer success organization as they moved from a single product focus to a platform company. And then third, and most recently at Kindsight as vice president of customer success, I transformed their customer success organization on the heels of 2 acquisitions. So yeah, lots of transformation in my past 3 roles, but it's been an exciting ride.
That's fantastic. So what I would love to do is maybe let's get granular and maybe you give us an example of one of the big transformational initiatives or projects that you've worked on or that you've led, and how has that impacted the customer success strategy at the organization?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about the last customer success transformation that I did at Kindsight. So Kindsight started as an SMB focused business. They had 2 major acquisitions, one of which was an enterprise platform. And so they had tasked me with bringing these 2 very different things together, an SMB motion and an enterprise motion, and rebuilding the customer success team while launching a brand new integrated platform, which integrated this SMB solution and the enterprise solution. So this is no small task, I'll have to say. And that SMB business had been entrenched in market for quite a while. The teams were pretty comfortable in what they were doing. And likewise on the enterprise business side, they had their own motions, which were quite different. So I'd say it was exciting, very challenging. And one of the core things is the people, right? There's the transformation of the business, but then the people aspect is so important, and maintaining team morale during this major transformation was both challenging but extremely important.
So in that example you provided, there any transformational initiative has inherent in it is a lot of change, right? And leading that change both from your internal stakeholders and partners that you work with in the organization, but also the change on the client side as well. Can you maybe talk about how do you effectively manage that change, or maybe give us some recommendations for, as someone's going through a transformational initiative like that, like what are some best ways to manage change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, first, change is hard. No one really likes change, even if it's good change. So let me talk about internal and then I'll talk about external. But on the internal side, yeah, the change, even though it might be exciting, there's a new vision, we're bringing these companies together, it's very exciting. The change is difficult. And so I strive for transparency first and foremost with my teams and the broader teams, talking about why we're making the change, getting them excited about the vision, where we're going as an organization, but then also bringing them along with me on the change. We all have to go through the change together. And just because I'm a leader in the organization doesn't mean that I have all the answers or even sometimes that I know what I'm doing, right? Because these are big things that we're trying to do, and it requires more than just me as a leader orchestrating this. It requires the other leaders. It requires all the individual contributors on the teams. We're so much smarter together. And so first, I strive for transparency, but also empathy. Change is hard, and I'm going through the change with my team. And certainly, as I made major changes at Kindsight, there were days when, in team meetings, I approached them and I was like, look, this is hard stuff. This is really hard. I get how you're feeling. I get that this is really uncomfortable. I get that it feels uncertain and maybe even a little bit chaotic. And really establishing that for me as a leader, it's my job to make these hard decisions and to basically go on the journey with them on this change. I'm with them 100% of the way. So that transparency and empathy go a long way. Do you want to comment or I
No,
can
no, no,
address the second
keep
part of
going.
your
Yeah.
question? Yeah, so you had asked about change on the external side. So there's internal change, which is very uncomfortable and difficult. Then there's a change for the customers. When you're changing a go-to-market strategy, this impacts customers. It changes everything from how they think about your brand and your solution to the platform that they purchase to the value that they're going to receive. And so keeping in mind that as an organization fundamentally changes its go-to-market strategy, like after an acquisition, this impacts customers and makes them feel uncertain. That can impact retention. So you need to be very intentional about how change is rolled out to the market and involving customers and getting their feedback along the way. Not all changes are good. Sometimes the changes that as an organization we think are good are not good for customers. I'll give one example of this, which is we did a rebranding and we changed the colors of the platform.
Hmm.
We love them. We thought they were great. Our customers immediately said that they didn't love them. In fact, some of them didn't meet the accessibility standards, and we needed to go back and then revise that. So, without that feedback loop from customers, we would have just kept going. But that feedback from customers and pivoting was really important.
Yeah. What I love about what you said about going through the change and having empathy, you said something which is like, I don't necessarily have all the answers, right? And I think that builds credibility that you're in it with them, right? And we're all kind of figuring it out together. And so I really like that comment. I have a question for you on the external side. So obviously, retention and renewals is very important. But as you're going through a change like that, where you're bringing sort of three organizations together, do the metrics change at all as part of that? Or are we still being held to the same goals and metrics, even though you're introducing a lot of variance here with your clients?
So, if I understand your question is like, do the metrics change when you change the go-to-market strategy and how you're measuring the business?
Do you get any relief from the retention number, knowing that there's going to be some upsetting of the apple cart as you manage some of this change?
And the short answer is no. You don't get any relief, right? The business is still a business. You're still looking to make a profit. Gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, your NPS and your CSAT scores, those are all the same. I wish I could say that you get relief. I always say that when you're going through change, wouldn't it be nice if you could just land the plane, make the change, and take off again? But that's not what happens. What happens is that the business keeps going. You are flying the plane and making changes
Right.
to the plane as you're flying it. And
Yeah.
so those metrics are still really important. In fact, they become more important to monitor because the changes are going to impact things. If they start impacting things negatively, you need to know that. Maybe you need to pivot, or maybe it's just a short sort of period in time and it will rebound. But if you're not watching those metrics, you don't know when and if you should pivot.
Mhm. Now, going back to the internal side of things, I think what you talked about before is like leading with empathy and being a little bit vulnerable is a lot of times in terms of like the people that maybe are part of the success organization and maybe report up through you. What about your peers? What about your CRO or your VP of sales, your VP of marketing, and they're in the strategy and the change with you, sometimes people are resistant to that, right? And there's differing opinions. Can you maybe talk about how do you bring your peers along with that change and some recommendations on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing peers along is extremely important. And in fact, I'd say that they're your first team and your team is your second team, meaning that you need to collaborate really closely at the peer level and with the other executives in the organization. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. And in fact, siloed change will fail. Right? If I made changes just on the customer success side with nothing changing on the sales or marketing product side, I
Yep.
will fail. Likewise, if sales makes the change on their side and doesn't involve me, that's going to fail. We're all connected. The
Yeah.
go-to-market journey is extremely connected. And so I'm very intentional about collaborating with my peers, running things by them, strategy, getting their feedback, talking about how it impacts their team and their go-to-market motions. Meaning, I'll just give an example, but when I change the customer journey, that impacts how we sell to customers. We need to set the right expectations of what they would expect on the post-sales side. So their implementation, their onboarding, their relationship with their customer success manager. If I change that and sales doesn't know, we're communicating the wrong message. We're setting the wrong expectations. So it's all connected. I collaborate very closely with my other leaders, meeting with them very frequently throughout the process.
Yeah, we see it very often where the different functions that make up go-to-market oftentimes are working in silos and maybe sometimes have different metrics, right? And I think what this change, this transformation actually brings an opportunity to then break down those silos and get on the same sort of sheet of music here. And so that, I think that's really interesting. I have a very tactical question for you because you mentioned something earlier about you had the SMB business and then you had the enterprise business. There's a big trend right now happening around optimizing the resources by segment and SMB maybe moving to more of like a digital channel as opposed to having that direct human relationship. What have you seen in that area? And as part of the change transformation that you made, was that part of your strategy or how do you align your resources to the different segments?
I love this question, and I also don't love this question, Randy, because the SMB segment is really hard to manage. And as a leader, I always say that there's two really difficult segments, actually. There's SMB and there's enterprise, and they're both challenging for different reasons. My love is everything in between. All of those sort of mid-market customers are your easiest customers to sort of manage, to create customer journeys against, etc. But SMB and enterprise each bring very unique challenges. On the SMB side, the challenge is that these customers have not paid a lot of money, right? So one, their investment is lower, both in terms of the capital investment they made, the actual dollars that they paid, but it's also lower in terms of they have less skin in the game, right? So it's easier for them to drop the solution. They also probably came in a high velocity sale, meaning the sale, it didn't take a long time. They didn't have to go through a rigorous decision making process. Maybe one person saw the product demo and thought, I like this, and they bought it. And so they're harder customers to retain and they're harder customers to onboard because they didn't pay a lot of money. You can very easily burn through the revenue that they paid you just in terms of touch points with the customer. Through the onboarding, the customer success manager, the more touch points you have with a human, the more you've burned through the revenue that they gave you in the first place. And so yes, you absolutely need to incorporate the right level of tech touch. I think this is where automation really comes in and AI, and that's certainly a hot topic in customer success right now. But I can honestly say that I don't think anyone's truly figured this out. How to have a high volume of SMB customers, make them profitable for the business, still onboard them and give them a great customer experience with the right level of tech touch and human touch. I told you this is a meaty question, and it's one of my least favorites because it's the most challenging.
Yeah, we could probably spend a whole for 30 minutes just talking about that, right? So as you go through a transformational change like this, is there a framework that you follow, and what makes up that framework?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And it's interesting because in the past week, my answers actually changed. So, the framework that I've used in my past three roles, I've actually just recently taken a course with Winning by Design called Revenue Architecture. That
Yep.
changed my framework. It wasn't that I didn't have a great framework before, but now that I actually have some models and some data and a way of thinking about making transformational changes, there's some additional things that I would definitely incorporate. So let me give you a couple of examples. But the first thing I would look at more closely is data before
Mhm.
jumping into any major change, and not just the data in the customer success organization, but the data across the go to market motion. Meaning, how many leads are we getting in from sales? What are they converting at? How many wins are we getting at? How much are we discounting? On the customer success side, what are the conversion rates there? Are we holding on to customers? Are we churning? Are we expanding? And where are the areas of challenge as well as areas of opportunity? I would look at the whole thing to start
Mhm.
to know exactly where to focus. I think the dangers when you're a customer success leader being asked to transform an organization is you want to change everything all at once, right? Everything needs changing, and you try and change sort of as many things as possible in as short a period of time. I would approach things a little bit differently now, and I would use data to know exactly where to change things that would give me the highest return. So, for instance, on the sales side, if win rates are great, so leads are great, conversions are great, you're getting lots of deals in the door, but you're discounting to get them in the door, that's problematic
Yep.
because on the post sales side, it's really hard to get a customer back to where they should actually be paying. Increasing their price over time can only usually happen in small increments. So
Mhm.
that's problematic. Another example is you could have great win rates, conversion rates, everything's going great on the sales side, but those deals are not actually a good fit. They're not actually the right ICP, right? And then those customers churn. That's also problematic. And so you can see how things are interrelated, and looking at the entire sort of journey, the entire go to market motion is really important. I can't increase net revenue retention by 2% if we're closing bad deals. That's not going to happen. Likewise, if we don't have a great onboarding process, that's also not going to happen. I think oftentimes we look at the end metric, the NRR and the GRR,
Yep.
without looking at all the metrics that came before that.
I want to dig in a little bit on the data piece because it's so important, and unfortunately, I think it's very rare where you see an organization who says our data is great, right? Most organizations have bad data, or they've got data that lives in disparate systems. So curious, as you went through this transformation, did you have a source of truth, and how reliable was it? Or did you have to go across several different systems to sort of collate all this data to make decisions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yes, different organizations have different sort of levels of data, cleanliness around data, rigors of data, even the data that they're capturing. I'd say this: use the data that you have to the
Mm-hmm.
best of your ability, and then intentionally capture the data that you need going forward. That's the best that you really can do.
Yeah.
Working with a RevOps person and across the organization is great just to help collect as much data as possible. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the data, you don't have the data. So
Yeah.
use what you've got, and then going forward, capture what you need.
Yeah. I think so. In sort of preparation for this podcast, I had listened to one that you did not too long ago, and there was something you said that really resonated with me, which was if you're at 70% of the strategy, good enough, right? Keep going. Like, how's the saying go? The enemy of success is perfection, right? You can't have it all figured out. So as it relates back to data, you're never going to have perfect data. Use what you have, make the decisions on that, right? Any comments on that idea of like, if you're 70%, you're good enough?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the 70% rule. It's not my rule. I went to see a speaker early in my career, and she said that. She was like, "Look, stop trying to be 100% sure of anything. You're never 100% sure. If you're 100% sure, you've already missed the boat." She was like, "70% is where it's at. If you're 70% sure of something, then you commit 110% to making sure that it's successful. And then if it's not working, you pivot." That she was like, it's just that simple. And so I really use this in all areas of my life. If it's like, oh, should we go on vacation? I don't know. And you start doing all your research and your homework and digging in. And it's like, look, if you're 70% sure that this is where you want to go on vacation, you've got the funds, makes sense, great. Book your ticket and then do your research, commit 110% to making sure that you have a great vacation. It's the same with business. We're never 100% sure of a decision. In fact, you really shouldn't be 100% in a decision when you roll it out to your team. You need buy-in from other people. Like I said, I don't have all of the answers. If I'm 100% sure of the vision or the strategy or what we're doing, nobody is going to buy in because they'd be like, oh, Andrea has all the answers. She's doing it, right? If I'm
Yeah.
70% sure, then I'm saying, look, I think that this is the right approach based on this data, based on these things. What do you think? Let's get a little closer, right, to 100%. We don't need to get to 100%, but let me just get your buy-in, get your feedback, take you on the journey. Then let's commit. And then it's 110% effort to really get there, right? We're 110% committed. We're going to
Yep.
make this successful. We'll pivot along the way. I think that's the best way to really approach anything in life. You can use it for dating if you
Yeah.
want. Right? You're never 100% sure. By the time you get to 100% sure, that person's dating someone else,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so getting back to the transformational initiative that you spoke about before, inevitably there's things that are not going to go perfect. There's going to be things that go wrong, and to your point, you got to pivot. Let's talk about some lessons learned, like with the benefit of being hindsight. What were some of the lessons that you learned from that transformational effort?
Oh my gosh, so many lessons learned, right? Because things don't go perfectly and it does require buy-in across the organization. Gosh, I would say, let me just say it's really important to reflect on the lessons learned. Reflecting on the lessons learned is the important piece because it's the willingness to go back and say, okay, what went well? What didn't go well? What would I do differently? I would definitely say, as I mentioned, I would incorporate more data into the decisions that I make. I think it's challenging sometimes as a leader because you can get pressure to make decisions really quickly, to act really quickly before you really know the direction that you need to go. And so, in hindsight, I would listen more to what the frontline teams were saying. I would have listened more to customers, and I would have gathered data and analyzed that better as best as I could before jumping in and making changes. It's not to say that the changes that I made weren't the right ones. It just means that I could have been more intentional and we probably could have created less chaos along the way if I had a little bit more structure.
Yeah. Before we wrap up the transformational discussion, I've got a couple questions for you that we're seeing in trends. I'd love to get your opinion on. But what have we not talked about as it relates to managing big transformational projects that maybe I should have asked you about or we didn't talk about yet?
Gosh, what haven't we talked about? We covered a lot of ground. We talked about the importance of people. We talked about some of the strategy. We talked about collaborating with other functional leaders and how important that is. We talked about the change management process, leading with empathy and transparency. So we covered a lot. I would say one thing we maybe didn't talk a lot about is executives and boards, right? So
Yep.
change and transformation almost always starts at the executive or the board level. What they're seeing, what they think the strategy should be based on the data and the information that they have and where they want to take the company. That's extremely important. It's always really important to know exactly what is that vision that the board has, that the executive team has, where are they getting their information from, what's the
Yep.
vision behind it. It's really interesting, but one of the things that I would look at a little bit more carefully or closely going into another organization is the board deck. And the reason I look at the board deck more carefully is I would actually count the number of slides in the board deck that are on acquisition and new business, how many are on marketing, and how many are on customer success. Almost always, there are less than half the number of slides on customer success as acquisition. And yet, customer success gross and net revenue retention is the lifeline of the business. That's where the profit and the value is going to come from, the long-term growth of the company. And so if there are half the number of slides on customer success as acquisition, that immediately tells me that there is a bias towards acquisition in the organization and that they have not looked at the full go-to-market motion.
That is a fantastic insight. I think that's really interesting. Anything else?
No, oh my gosh, we've covered so much, including my 70% rule. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I mean, maybe I know you were going to ask me about what
Yeah.
I've
I got
read
you. Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
which it's funny. I was trying to think of, what would I share? I would say there's two books that I've read more than once in my career, which is very rare. I very rarely read something more than once. And as they relate to customer success and transformation, one is the Customer Success Professional's Handbook, and the other is the pillars of customer success. Both of these are great. And then if you're not a big reader, or if you like to read and you like a little bit more, I highly recommend the Revenue Architecture course by Winning
Yep.
by Design.
Yep.
Phenomenal course. I wish that it existed earlier in my career, because there's no degree or schooling that really prepares you to be a leader in a go-to-market function. And I would say this course is as close as you can get, to providing that level of academic sort of rigor
Yeah.
that's really important to have, especially when looking at data and models and strategy across an organization. So highly recommend those two books and the course.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about revenue architecture, and it actually is going to be related to one of my sort of other questions, is the focus on the right side of the bow tie, right? Because
Yes, yes.
100%, 100%, because, and that leads to sort of my off topic question I had for you. So, like right now, most, not all, of course, but most SaaS organizations are struggling to build pipeline, right? In meeting numbers, and so when that happens, it means that we got to protect everything that we have, right? As much as we can. And so there has been this big focus right now on customer success, investing in customer success to protect that revenue, and make sure we don't lose it. But can we expand, right? Because it's so much cheaper to expand with your existing customers than bring on a new one. Are you seeing the same thing? And as you talk to other leaders, it's sort of a similar sentiment or similar trend?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, I absolutely agree that it's important, especially in today's economy, sort of the market for SaaS companies. It's extremely important to grow your existing customers. Your returns over time are so much greater. Am I seeing it reflected in the other organizations or like SaaS companies today? No, not really, which is interesting. And that's where I was saying, like, I would look at the board deck and see how many slides are on acquisition versus retention. But, and in other leaders, yeah, I think that the leaders sort of know it, but I'm not sure that we've embraced it, if that makes sense. Meaning, like, I still see a lot of organizations focused on acquisition. And I also see a lot of organizations cutting their resources on the customer success side. That is
Yeah.
the worst
Yeah.
thing that you can do as an organization right now, is put your resources on acquisition instead of your customers. Put your
Yeah.
resources on your customers,
Yeah.
scale back on acquisition, because the long-term growth will come out of the customers. So to answer your question, yes, 100% agree. Do I
Yeah.
see it reflected in the market? Not exactly.
And why do you think that is? Like any hypothesis in terms of what why that is?
I don't know. So it is a really interesting question. I do wonder, and this is just, it's my opinion, nothing more, but I do wonder if it's still a bit of the hangover of on-premise type solutions, meaning we've always, as businesses, been focused on the left side of the bow tie, on
Yep.
acquisitions,
Yep.
right? For years and years and years, it was about getting customers in the door for any type of business. SaaS turns that on its head, where it says, yes, get your customers in the door, but you really need to focus on growing them, which is the right side of the bow tie. I think we're still wrapping our heads around the right side of the bow
Yeah.
tie and haven't completely adapted to the fact that that's a priority. I think there's still the sort of legacy mentality that new customers is where it's at. That's how you sustain your business, which is not true.
Okay, next question is around the increasing number of people that are involved in a buying decision, right? As we call sort of buying committees or buying groups, and sales engages with so many different people as part of the process to land a deal. Sales reps are notoriously bad at capturing all those different people and putting them into a system, and so the deal gets sold. It's handed off over to CS, and CS is like, all right, who's most important on the account? Who are the influencers? And oftentimes what happens is once the deal's done and it goes to an implementation, like all of those influential people kind of go away, and it's delegated down to like an administrator of the client's end that manages the tool, and the CSM gets stuck sort of at that level and talking to that person, and they've got weekly or biweekly standing meetings to talk to that person, but yet when it comes to delivering value to and outcomes that the company's trying to achieve, right? Why they bought the software, it's hard to engage those other stakeholders, right?
Yes.
Sometimes they don't even know who they are because again, the sales reps didn't capture them. But if you're trying to look at expanding business, right? If you're moving over a single, if you're a point solution, you're trying to sell a platform, like you need those other people involved. So what recommendations do you give for people that are kind of in that scenario, and how does a CSM sort of think of it as a renewal committee, right, or an expansion
Yeah.
committee? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, and this is kind of the age-old problem, right? Is that transition from sales to CS. And I like to think of the customer like an egg, like a hard-boiled egg, right? Where you're holding onto a hard-boiled egg. As you pass the egg from team to team and from person to person, you want to maintain the egg intact, right? With the shell on, right? With the white inside and the yolk in the middle. But what happens is you start losing pieces of the shell. And then you start losing pieces of the white. And then all of a sudden you get to the end and all you're holding is the yolk. Well, that's really problematic to your
Yeah.
point because who are you going to sell to? Who are you going to expand to? You're left holding one champion and that champion leaves the organization and all of a sudden the customer churns. So as much as you can keep the egg whole as you pass it from team to team, the better. And I'm not just talking about, the AE to the CSM or the AE to the onboarding team. I'm talking about from the BDR to the AE, from the AE to the onboarding manager, from the onboarding manager to the CSM, from the CSM to the renewals rep, if you have one, the account manager, whoever it is. You have
Yeah.
to keep your egg whole. And in fact, you need to be adding to the egg as you transition, right? And
Yep.
not taking away from the egg. And so capturing information about the customer in one place like Salesforce is extremely important. And obviously, the larger the customer, if it's a strategic or enterprise customer, the more important that is. An SMB customer, if you can capture even the bare bones in a high velocity sale of who the key stakeholders are and why they purchase the solution, that's great. That's probably good enough. But when you get to an enterprise customer, you need to know the the map, right? In that organization, who
Yep.
made the decision, who are the supporting functions, who's the executive sponsor, what are the other departments that maybe you haven't expanded in today that you could expand into. All of that information is extremely important. You need to increase the rigor around what you capture.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, the sales process is always slower in those types of deals, and so you have more time to capture that. But the more that you can capture, the better, because to your point, it has a direct impact on retention at the end of the day. The more you can keep that egg whole, the better.
Yeah. Now, what you had said about trying to keep it in one system of record and capturing it in, say, Salesforce, that is the goal, right? I think that's what everybody wants to do. But man, it's just really hard to do, right? People just don't do it. And so how do you change that? Is it incent the behavior? You have to have the leadership from the top, which is like, this is the way that we do it. Because so many organizations, like in theory, that's what they want to do. But in practice,
Yeah.
you look at it and it's just not there. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's always a challenge because look, if you ask an AE what the favorite part of their job is, they're
No.
not going to tell you it's putting notes in a Salesforce.
Right.
Likewise, if you ask a CSM what is their favorite part of their job, they're not going to say it's putting notes in a Salesforce. Nobody likes to put notes into Salesforce. And I think this is where AI can really help us.
Yeah.
So things like Gong that basically will capture a call, the relevant sort of points of that call, the next steps, perfectly imperfect. AI can help us greatly in this area, right? Taking notes on calls, getting those directly into Salesforce, super important. Any way that we can save time for our individual contributors and leverage AI is
Yeah.
amazing here. Even ChatGPT, even if you've got nothing else, you've got ChatGPT, throw your notes, whatever you have in there, get ChatGPT to spit something out and put that
Yeah.
into Salesforce is super key. And then to your point, how do you kind of, you don't want to police it, but how do you motivate people? How do you ensure that this actually happens? Some of the things you can do is just saying it's not moving. This opportunity doesn't move to the next stage unless these things are entered into Salesforce.
Yeah.
Likewise, on the customer success side, and that handoff from sales to customer success, you cannot move this customer to onboarding without these details filled in. You can, add incentives around that, whether it's recognition, rewards, whatever it is. I have rewarded, top note takers in the past because it's important. It makes a difference. Now, having said that, you let's just talk about the opposite for 1 second, because in every organization there's the person who creates meticulous notes that are so long and they're full sentence paragraphs, right? There's always at least one. You got to incent the person the other way.
Yeah.
Bullet points,
Yeah.
super brief, right? Because they're spending too much time on their notes. We don't need full sentences. We need high impact bullet points that communicate relevant details.
Yeah. I think the point on technology, like the technologies has gotten so good to this point that if you don't leverage it and you're still asking your reps to do it manually, like you're missing a huge opportunity, a huge efficiency, like because reps don't want to add the data, the CSMs add the data. They shouldn't have to, right? It's gotten to the point where you can capture it. And I think AI is only going to enhance that. I do want to ask you a couple questions on our lightning round here. And we already talked a little bit about your favorite book, so we can skip that. But I'll ask you two questions. So as a CS leader, what's the favorite part of your job?
Yes, hands down the people. I just love my team, love working with people. I mean, you have to love working with people. I think both customers and your team, yeah, hands down, best part of the job.
Yeah. Now, there's a flip side to that question, right? Which is least favorite, or sometimes I ask the question, I say, what's really hard about your job?
Yeah, least favorite. So I don't love pulling data. I don't mind analyzing the data, but I don't love pulling it together from different sources and trying to figure out whether it's true. And yeah, not my favorite. So if someone helps me get the data, I'm more than happy to analyze it and ask the right questions, but don't ask me to get the data.
Great. All right, last question. What advice would you give somebody who is maybe a little bit more junior in their career, who would like to be a leader sometime? What skill sets might they acquire, or just general advice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, bottom line is you can do it. I mean, it's so funny, but I think, there's all the slogans and, all the sayings that like you can do it, right? But you really can. Like you are the orchestrator of your career. And so don't wait around for others to get you there. They won't. Right? And so it really is your responsibility. Attack it with intention, right? But it's absolutely doable. And on the customer success side, there's so many resources. There's everything from books to groups that you can join to, just talking to people and networking. Like it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you just do it and you take ownership of your own career, right? Ask for advice, look for mentors. People are willing to help. But that's fantastic. Andrea, I just want to say thank you very much. I thought this was a really insightful conversation. I appreciate your time. I know our listeners will enjoy the episode as well. So that's another episode of the Revenue Lounge. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.